The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I have a really funny story for you. I got an email from a viewer the other day, and the viewer said, David, due to an unfortunate situation, someone peeled my cherished David Pakman Show bumper sticker off of my truck. I was wondering where I could get another one if I can. Obviously, I'll pay. It's a matter of pride for me now. And the email sounded so unusual that because of an unfortunate situation, something happened to the sticker that I said, I will gladly send you a replacement for free if you just tell me the story. And the story is amazing. And here it is. Well, my pops is a socially conservative kind of dude. One day I was sitting on the couch and I saw him go outside with a scraper. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but the next day at work, I realized that someone had removed the David Pakman Show bumper sticker from my truck. When I got home, I asked both of my parents if they knew what happened. My mother said she had noticed the bumper sticker, but she didn't care. My father, on the other hand, had seen it and decided unilaterally, without any family discussion or forum, to remove the sticker on the basis that this family doesn't advertise political affiliations. Now, my father is a competent man and he believes in Obama and understands that progressivism is the future. However, when I got an Obama 2012 sign, he refused to let me stick it in our yard. I think it's because, above all else, he just doesn't want to draw attention from the neighbors. I, on the other hand, while not belligerent about my views, am willing and ready to support the causes I believe in. In this case, that meant something as little as putting a bumper sticker on my truck. I'm just trying to show my father that if someone is willing to get uppity over a bumper sticker, it is our duty as reasonable people to stay the course, hold the wheel, and steer on to freedom. David Pakman Show bumper stickers, because freedom and because liberty. And of course, I sent out another sticker for free to this individual who I am not naming in case there is blowback as a result of this incredible scandal. But a very funny story. Goes out there, sees, I can just picture it, sitting there and seeing the dad with a scraper walk out into the driveway and then just walk back in. And then the next day realizing that the bumper sticker is gone. So the bumper sticker has been replaced. And if it disappears again, please let us know. And I actually would love to know if there was a discussion about the fact that a new bumper sticker arrived. I would love to know what happened there. It seems like a conversation it would be great to be a fly on the wall for. Reliance on smartphones has been linked to lazy thinking. There's a new study from researchers at the University of Waterloo, and they published this study in the journal Computers in Human Behavior. And they talk about how now with our smartphones, we can find phone numbers very quickly. We can instantly get directions to places. We can get restaurants recommended. And the research says that this, while very convenient, makes it easy for us to avoid thinking for ourselves. And it suggests that smartphone users who are intuitive thinkers, right, those who are more prone to rely on gut feelings and instincts when making decisions, frequently use smartphone search engines rather than their own brain power, and that smartphones are encouraging or enabling an increased amount of laziness. A quote from one of the researchers: they may look up information that they actually know or could easily learn, but are unwilling to make the effort to actually think about it. There were 3 studies. They involved 660 participants, and the researchers examined various measures, including cognitive style, ranging from whether someone has a tendency to be more intuitive or analytical, verbal, numeracy skills, and then they looked at smartphone habits. And what they found was that participants who demonstrated stronger cognitive skills and a greater willingness to think analytically spent less time using their smartphone search function. Now, I have some serious concerns here. We have to talk about causation versus correlation. Are those who have stronger cognitive and analytical skills on their smartphones less for some other reason that is not causally related? And another counter argument would be, you could imagine that offloading the need to remember rote memorization type data, phone numbers, directions, stuff like that, that offloading that would free our minds for other kinds of thinking. And, an analogy would be, when humans had to be hunting all day and trying not to be eaten by bears to survive, it's hard to put too much time into mathematics and science. Now that for many in the developed world, we don't have to go out and forage or hunt for food, and we can pretty easily not get killed by other animals without putting too much effort into it, we're able to expand the fields that we think about and work in. The study is interesting, and I have thought about this. I used to remember all my friends' phone numbers. Now, I still remember a lot of them, but there's many that I don't remember because I always have my smartphone address book with me. If I were to lose it, it absolutely would be a problem. Very interesting thing to study. But before we say that there's a causal relationship here, I think we need to look into many, many more studies and do another type of study as well that is not only going to show us the correlation here. We've talked about homeopathy for a long time, and I have long touted it as non-science, worthless. I hesitate to even call it medication because it's really not. It's really nothing. And Australia's top medical research body has actually now concluded that homeopathy is not effective for treating any health condition after they've done a review of existing studies. Homeopaths believe that illness-causing substances can, in very small doses, treat people who are not well, and sometimes not illness-causing substances. Sometimes it could be herbs or supplement-type substances, etc. And the theory, and I use that term not scientifically, and I should not do that. The hypothesis is that the more you dilute the dose, the more effective it is. Now, this belies the most basic credulity. If you just think about it, if you were to dilute Advil, if you were to dilute 100 milligrams of ibuprofen in a glass of water and drink it, versus diluting it in a pool and drinking one glass, it's obvious why this at face value makes absolutely no sense. And this has been confirmed by multiple studies. And now the National Health and Medical Research Council reviewed 225 different research papers on homeopathy. And they said, quote, people who choose homeopathy may put their health at risk if they reject or delay treatments for which there is good evidence for safety and effectiveness. Obvious. I mean, I'm glad that this was put out there. It was done in Australia. Hopefully people in the US will also be aware of it. James Randi has done some really good debunkings of homeopathy. And I think I've told the story before. When I was about 12, my mom took me to a homeopath before she realized it was totally bogus, which she now does. We were immigrants to this country and my mom just was not too familiar with it. A friend recommended it and she brought me. And the reason was that I all of a sudden developed a fear of flying. I had significant anxiety around flying. From age 5 to 11 or so, fine. And around 11 or 12, I developed a very acute fear of flying where I would almost not have a panic attack, but I would get very panicked when the flight was about to take off. And my mom brought me to a homeopath, and the homeopath asked me all sorts of odd questions. It actually reminded me of the scene in Seinfeld where Kramer brings George to some kind of healer dude, and the guy says to George he should be showering with cold water and all sorts of weird stuff. It was similar. She said, do you ever suck on ice cubes during the day? Do you think that if you were to not use an alarm to wake up, you'd be able to train your mind to wake you up at the time you want? Just really off-the-ball stuff that did not, to me, appear as though it had any connection to my flight anxiety. And then they prescribed me I forget what it was. It was some kind of substance that, I don't remember. It was a while ago. And it was in these, little sugar pills. And I remember that I asked, so should I be taking this all the time or like when I'm going to have a flight or what? And the homeopath said it didn't really matter, that I could start a regular course of it or that I could just start the day before my flight. And I would put these things under my tongue, which I loved because they were just like candy. They were sugary. And ultimately, I dropped it, still had my fear of flying for about another year, and then eventually just got over it. And it was, now when I talk to my mom about it, we both kind of laugh about it, knowing, of course, that this is just completely bogus. And it's also making people spend a lot of money on these sugar pills that often have no active ingredient at all in them, or sometimes have such a small amount that it is of absolutely no significance, but very often no active ingredient whatsoever in so-called homeopathic medicine. A couple of bills have been proposed to eliminate daylight savings time. We recently moved our clocks forward an hour. More and more legislators in different states are questioning whether this is a good idea. So Hawaii and Arizona are currently the two states that have stayed on, that stay on standard time year round. So for example, in Arizona is 2 hours behind the East Coast during part of the year and 3 hours behind the East Coast part of the year because they don't change their clocks. Initially, daylight savings was set up to give people an extra hour of sunlight in the spring and in summer evenings, which was originally thought to save energy. Now it's not so clear that that's the case. Senate Bill 99 in Oregon would let voters decide whether the state should just forget about daylight savings time altogether. Washington state lawmakers have a similar bill, which would put them on Pacific Standard Time year-round. And Texas is considering a similar bill. Now, the Texas bill is kind of funny. Their bill is more about ending government intrusion. They say that it's tyrannical and too intrusive for the government to dictate when they change clocks. The funny thing is that if you decide not to do daylight savings time, you're still adhering to what the government has established as standard time. So it's hilarious that that's the explanation in Texas, but they do have a bill anyway. Now, I actually would love to just stay on daylight savings time because I would prefer based on the time I get up, when I get up, it's light out anyway, no matter whether it's daylight savings time or standard time. I would prefer the extra hour of sunlight at the end of the day. And there's a federal law that prohibits permanently being on daylight savings time. What the federal law allows is for you to either do daylight savings and then switch back to standard time as per the federal schedule, or to simply stay on standard time. And my preference would be let's stay on daylight savings time all the time. I don't think we're really benefiting at this point, and farmers tend to agree, but with the switch. Many farmers are now saying it makes no difference for us. We have huge lights. We can do our work at any time. Originally, farming schedules and light around farming was part of the reason for the switch. I say let's stay on daylight savings time, but alas, the tyrannical federal government doesn't allow that. But seriously, that would be something to consider. I really don't see the point at this time of continuing to make the switch back to standard time. I would much prefer just having the extra hour year round. Send me your thoughts. Is there some specific reason that I'm not mentioning, I'm not thinking of, I'm not aware of for why going back and forth makes sense, or why standard time would be better than daylight savings time if we had to go year round? I really can't think of one, and I spent a bunch of time this morning researching this. On today's bonus show, an artist turns DNA from chewed gum into sculptures. In Florida, the Department of Environmental Protection can't say climate change anymore, but they haven't put it in writing. I can speculate about why on the bonus show. And this is sad. You might be eating seafood that was fed pig feces. It's an ugly story, but one that we must discuss today on the bonus show. davidpakman.com/membership to sign up, and we will talk to you on the bonus show after a fantastic show. We have a great classic interview. We're going to answer audience questions. We're going to review some older great stories and much more. Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Don't forget that we depend on our audience to fund our program. This program would have disappeared long ago, like 98% of the shows that started in 2005, like ours. and are now gone, we might also be gone were it not for the membership program. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. Today's new member of the day is Charles Felix. Charles, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Truly couldn't do it without you. And in addition to the membership program, you can support the work we do. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, go to our website, davidpakman.com first, click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page, and then just do your shopping. And you will get you will be sending us a kickback for every purchase you make. 4 years ago this week, Newt Gingrich claimed that he had an affair because of how much he loved America during a total softball interview with the Christian Broadcasting Network. He said sometimes he works too hard for the country he loves, and it causes him to do bad things. If he's working so hard, I don't know how he even had time for affairs. But that was, Lewis, one of his most incredible comments. His patriotism, his such significant devotion to the country led to him having an affair.
And I think that was around the same time he fell asleep during that. He fell asleep during something and then kind of snapped out of it and asked if there were questions from a panel that didn't exist.
That's right.
So, maybe I guess he does work pretty hard. I mean, he's fallen asleep on camera.
Okay, some of Newt's best and worst quotes. Democrats will bring to the U.S. the joys of Soviet-style brutality and the murder of women and children. That still hasn't happened. Newt Gingrich saying, people like me are what stand between us and Auschwitz. But certainly delusions of grandeur there. I'm convinced that if we do not decisively win the struggle over the nature of America, by the time they're my age, they will be in a secular atheist country, potentially one dominated by radical Islamists. How a country dominated by some of the most huge religious zealots would be an atheist country, I don't really know. I'm not a natural leader. I'm too intellectual. I'm too abstract. I think too much. Delusions of grandeur once again. The idea that a congressman would be tainted by accepting money from private industry or private sources is essentially a socialist argument. No, it's really just an anti-corruption argument. And lastly, the problem isn't too little money in political campaigns, but not enough, which I am not even sure what he meant by that.
I think what he means is that money in politics and campaigns is not a problem because there's not even enough of it. There needs to be way more money in politics, I guess.
I really hope Newt runs again in 2016.
That would be nice. And I think he would like to be president of the United States more than anything in the world. So I'm thinking that he probably will run.
He and Mitt Romney both strike me as guys who just desperately want to be president because they're convinced they deserve it.
Yeah, they're convinced they deserve it. They are convinced that they are superhuman almost.
1 year ago this week, religious zealot Ray Comfort joined me to talk about his displeasure with the Hollywood movie Noah. And then he was producing another version of Noah, which I guess was more biblical. This is the guy, in case you forgot, who said that God is real because of bananas. Bananas prove God is real. And that whole conversation I had with him about Noah's Ark is a conversation that is one of the most debated pieces of the Bible between atheists and believers, because there's just so much that would be impossible about it. And the Hollywood movie seemed to have magical elements that believers weren't buying. They think it was all done with elbow grease by a 600 or 700-year-old man with almost no help, right, Lewis?
I think either no or very limited help, yes.
And of course, skeptics point out the absurdity of putting two of every animal on a boat. Believers say it's two of every kind, but it's still absurd because some of those animals only eat other animals. And if you have two of every kind, presumably those animals need to eat. And as soon as one of them eats another species, another kind, then you don't have enough of those to reproduce. You've got freshwater and saltwater sea creatures. How do you get both saltwater and freshwater tanks, given that the flood happened in one particular place? I mean, none of it makes sense.
And if you have only two of every kind of animal, and now we have so many different diverse kinds of animal, different species.
Oh, right, yeah. Given that it was only a few thousand years ago, the time would not allow for that species diversity.
Right. And presumably you would also be believing in evolution then to some extent.
We were all looking forward to that Noah's Ark theme park in Kentucky. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be happening anytime soon because they were denied a bunch of taxpayer money because they admitted we're only hiring devout Christian believers, which is obviously employment discrimination, which they also felt, much like people like Ray Comfort ignore the reality about Noah's Ark. The Noah's Ark Museum people were ignoring the reality that just because it's a Noah's Ark Museum, you can't ignore the law.
Right. And that was $18 million they were denied. Can you imagine if they were granted $18 million in taxpayer dollars to build Noah's Ark?
1 year ago this week, President Obama was interviewed by Zach Galifianakis. At the time, conservatives were saying it's so damaging to the president to appear with a comedian, and it's just such a disaster. But at this point, with the President Obama presidency starting to wrap up, I think it's clear he's loosening up a bit. He did the Thanks Obama kind of satirical video. He did the Zach Galifianakis thing. And I don't think that this is really a big deal at all. It's the president. He's doing his job. He, by the way, even Obamacare, which is what he was on the Zach Galifianakis show to promote, is going to cost less than expected. It is working well in spite of the talking points from the right. I see it as such a non-issue to try to make a controversy over Obama on a comedy show.
I think I do like that he's loosening up a bit. It makes him appear to be more human. And, you know, he's got no campaign to run. If he's going to have harsh criticism and be insulted all the time anyway, why not try to have some fun? And I think more importantly, it's time to push the policies that we need that are unpopular, perhaps, now that he doesn't have to worry about elections. Or is he actually going to worry about what happens with the Democrats in 2016?
Well, I think that's the more salient question, which is whatever Obama does, is it helping or hurting the positioning of whoever will be the Democratic nominee for 2016? And even though President Obama does not have another campaign to run, as he repeated a few times now, you still have to assume he doesn't want to see much of his work undone by a Republican being elected in 2016. So he has to think about how his actions will impact the next election.
And how invested is he in making sure his Secretary of State has a good shot at the presidency? Because it seems like that is going to happen as well.
A former Secretary of State. You don't mean John
Right.
Kerry. You mean Hillary, I assume.
Hillary. Right.
Yeah, no question about
Excuse
it.
me.
Excuse me, Louis. My apologies.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a fantastic program for you today. Make sure to follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman, and make sure to check out all of the great membership options to support the show at davidpacman.com/membership. We do depend on viewer funding to keep the show going.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. Welcome back to the David Pacman Show.
We've been experiencing a severe deficit of critical and logical reasoning skills and thinking lately. So for the classic interview today, we're going to go back to December 5th of 2011, where we spoke to Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. He's an advisor and fellow of the Society of Ontario Freethinkers. He wrote a really good book, which I've read, called How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass, and he talks about critical thinking. I still recommend his book as a really great thing to take a look at. We are running into this when it comes to climate science very, very much, vaccine science, even with regard to gay rights, teaching evolution in schools, etc. We need to be thinking way more critically than we are as a country, and this interview with Christopher DiCarlo is still one of the most interesting along these lines. Let's check it out. Dr. Christopher DiCarlo is with us. He's a fellow, advisor, and board member of the Society of Ontario Freethinkers and the Centre for Inquiry in Canada. He's also a past visiting research scholar in the Stone Age Laboratory at Harvard University. Dr. DiCarlo, I have the book, How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass, A Critical Thinker's Guide to Asking the Right Questions. I've read a bunch of it. I'm actually going to take it with me on a flight next week and hope to finish the whole thing. I'm fascinated by it because in the U.S., there's a lot of discussion about, are people thinking critically about so many different issues? Politics is kind of the obvious one, but then we also get into discussions of when religion comes into play, are people for some reason choosing not to think critically, or are they unable of critical thinking when they are clouded by some of the teachings of religion. Now, you're an atheist, and you also consider yourself a critical thinker. So I'm curious whether you think that both of those are linked in some kind of obvious way, or if they just happen to come together. Religion and lack of critical thinking in some cases.
It can. It doesn't have to always be that way, but it does get in the way. And you see this with like Fox and Friends. You see it in a number of other cases where when people answer what I call the big five, the biggest questions we can ask about ourselves, and when they answer them supernaturally, you tend to think, well, okay, how do those answers trickle down and affect the way they answer other questions that deal with social policy and other political aspects of day-to-day life within any given population?
So you talk about the big five questions, and those are: what can I know? Why am I here? What am I? How should I behave? And what is to come of me? So these are questions that, for a lot of people, the answers are in religion. Many different religions around the world, but for many people, the answers there are in religion. Do you say that the answers to all five of those questions are based in science? What are they based in?
Well, in the book, what I do is I look at how people can answer them naturally or supernaturally, and then I just kind of put it out there and say, where do you fall with these answers? Do you try to reconcile the natural with the supernatural? Do you chuck out the supernatural? It's not an aspect of your life that you particularly need. Are you predominantly a supernaturalist, and you abide more by the teachings and words of specific texts and people and experiences and so on and so forth? The fact of the matter is, science has in many ways been not so much undermining religious answers to those questions, but certainly given us a lot of reasons to reconsider how they have been answered in the past and to what extent they're relevant today.
Is this more of a training issue? In other words, is it a matter of not being taught how to think critically about things? Is it a lack of aptitude? I mean, what is it really that you see in most people who are not exhibiting the type of critical thinking you outline in the book?
Right. Obviously, I'm somewhat biased in favor of critical thinking. I'll make no pretensions against that. But yeah, the fact of the matter is, when kids come to school in kindergarten grades 1 to 12, we assume they know how to think. But the fact of the matter is, there are rules for having discussions, for thinking, for making your case, presenting arguments. And when you violate some of these rules, we have the capacity, we have these tools that say, hey, wait a minute, hang on. No, you can't quite get away with that unless you do some more work here. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to answering those big five in a supernatural way, what happens is that gets embroiled within a cultural context. And if it becomes, say, enshrined within some kind of religious dogma, then politically, a lot of people say, well, you know what, we have to respect that. It's their religious beliefs, and we speak in kind of hushed tones about these sorts of things. Now, I have no problem with constitutional rights for freedom of religion. Absolutely none. You can pray to flying squirrels for all I care. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is when those answers are put into actions and they affect the lives of other people who don't necessarily belong to the same club that answers the big five in that same way.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that there's is there a possible coexistence of both religion and critical thinking at the level you're talking about, or can they simply not exist together?
They can exist, but it is a delicate balancing act. And what has to happen is a basis of understanding that there's a difference between having belief in certain things and then taking into action what follows or is entailed, logically entailed by those beliefs. So it really comes down to what I call, it's in the book, the tolerance harm inverse proportion law. So you, me, everybody else, we can tolerate people's beliefs and people's actions, provided they're not generating harm or considerable harm or perceived harm to our species or other species. Once that level of harm starts to rise, then our level of tolerance then dips. And there's going to be an intersecting point where harm and tolerance are inversely proportionate. When harm rises, tolerance lowers. And it's at that intersecting point where we would say, as philosophers, as critical thinkers, I think we have a moral obligation now to say something about it and perhaps physically do something about it, where we disagree because harm is being generated by these views and these actions.
What areas in the U.S. specifically do you see that the tolerance seems to be too high for lack of critical thinking? Is it specifically on issues around politics? Is it around science and, of course, discussions of evolution versus intelligent design? I mean, where are you most concerned with it?
The two areas that I'm most concerned with and have been throughout my life, one costing me a job, was on human origins, discussions about human origins, and where science clearly demonstrates we are the descendants of African apes. A great many people have trouble with this because they perceive themselves to be specially created and that we are not on the same level as other primates. So that's why I've created this shirt. You know, back in 2005, I was fired for writing "We Are All African" on the board in a critical thinking class, and I said, "Now, why would Darwin and others maintain that this is a true statement, and what reason would we have to doubt this?" And I was taken to task by a couple of students, one Aboriginal and one Christian, who felt that my views offended their particular worldviews. Human origins is certainly a big one, and of course, homosexuality is another one. And the fact that I'm Canadian, so I have the privilege of looking down at Americans, of course, because we're perfect in every way. And when I see people like Michelle Bachmann and her husband, Marcus Bachmann, who's into things like reparative therapy for gay men, you know immediately that the way he has answered the big five supernaturally has now affected the way he acts in life and is affecting the lives of other people. So he's not just believing this stuff, he's acting on this stuff. My information that I've compiled over the years maintains fairly clearly that homosexuality is not a life choice, it's who you are. You were born that way. You're no different from any heterosexual person. So, in fact, sexuality is amoral. That is to say, you can't morally judge a person's sexuality since they don't choose it. They're simply born that way. Now, you can see how I've answered the big five and the way in which it trickles down and affects the way I see the world versus, say, a Dr. Marcus Bachmann and the way he sees the world. So now we put it on the table and say, okay, who's right? What are we using to measure correctness? What are we using to measure, who has the better argument here and why?
Absolutely, and I wish we had more time, because the next question I want to get to is how might we, in your mind, move away from such a situation, particularly in the U.S., and I know you live in Canada, where so much of all politics and news and everything really is based around religion and often lack of critical thinking. The book is How to Become a Really Good Pain in the Ass. The author and our guest has been Dr. Christopher DiCarlo. It's been a pleasure, and we'd love to have you back.
Well, thank you very much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's time to answer your questions. Submit them however you want. Voicemail, email, Twitter, Facebook. Your call. Danielle wrote in, "Hey guys, how often are you recognized in public? What's the typical reaction? Do most people attempt to talk politics with you? Are there a lot of people who ask for photos or autographs? How do you feel about that? Are there certain situations where you would prefer not to be approached?" Okay, Lewis, you want to go first on this one?
I would say I am very rarely recognized in public. And the typical reaction is that, well, I guess half the time people recognize me, but they don't know where from. And so I kind of have to tell them. And I do. And I would say that they usually do not want to talk politics. They usually just want to say, "What are you doing here? What's new? How are you?" Occasionally, they will want to talk politics. They'll have a politician or story they want to talk about that they think is really crazy. No one has asked me for an autograph thus far.
Yep, no one has asked me for an autograph, but a few people have wanted to take selfies. Just the other day, I was on the west side of Manhattan, pretty far west, like I think near 11th Avenue. And I walked out of a building and a guy just was right there. And he said, "Oh, hey, David Pakman, I watch you on YouTube. Can we take a selfie?" I said, "Sure." The entire interaction was probably under 30 seconds, I would say. The other day I was leaving the studio and I was waiting for the subway to go back to Brooklyn. And a guy came up to me and he said, "Hey, I'm Carl. I watch your show, whatever," which was great. So I think it's happened in New York 6 times since I moved here 18 months ago. So I guess that's like once every 3 months. I don't think it's that much. Back in Northampton, Massachusetts, when I go back there, since the show started there and it's a smaller area, and for a while we had more extensive media coverage, it happens way more often that I get recognized. And generally, that's great. I'm glad to talk to people and say hello. Rarely do people want to actually talk about politics. There was one time when I go to a conference, a political conference, that's where people recognize me more and want to talk politics. And that can be challenging because there's usually a lot going on. And, some people are not that aware of not monopolizing your time. So I'm trying to speak diplomatically here, but I've had a couple instances where someone wanted to just have a 45-minute conversation with me about the specifics of, traffic tickets as a source of police revenue or something like that. Perfectly valid topic, but when I'm at a conference for a couple days or a day and a half, that's not my favorite thing to necessarily engage in, but I'm always up for meeting people, Lewis. People often asking me where Lewis is, as if somehow Lewis and I are just always together or something like that, even when I'm in like a different part of the country or something. But I guess it's roughly once every 3 months here in New York.
Yeah, and I guess it's maybe close to the same here for me in Texas. They do like to take selfies, and I'm happy to meet fans. I mean, I think perhaps if I were being recognized more often, I might feel differently about it. But because it happens so infrequently, I'm totally fine with it.
Peter wrote in, have either of you ever had a situation where you helped an injured animal? Lewis, I think you might actually have a story about this.
Do I? Well, I know that there was a time where a bird flew through a window at my neighbor's house, and my dad and I kind of fostered it back to health. There was a time where I had to help a duckling up onto a curb because the rest of the family was getting away from it. But am I forgetting something? You seem to know specifically about
Oh, no,
something.
I may be just wrong. I just thought that you had some story related to this. I remember when we were about, I'd say 12 years old, on your parents' street, we biked by and there was a squirrel that had been hit clearly and half of its body was flattened and it was alive and looking around, and you and I were trying to figure out what to do with it. And a car drove up, like an actual adult drove up and realized that we were just 2 kids dealing with this. And the person said, "I'm wondering whether I should just run the squirrel over again and put it out of its misery." But we weren't there for the resolution. We may have just been sent back to your parents' house because they wanted to get us out of there before they were going to, deal with what was left of the squirrel. But do you remember that incident?
I don't. And thinking about how I was back then, I probably wouldn't have liked that resolution. But but I realized that would have been the correct thing to do at the time. I know that anytime my mom would see, occasionally I think my mom would see a stray cat, and she tried to help a couple cats that were in not so great shape. But yeah, I don't think there are any big ones. I mean, the bird was an interesting one.
Yeah, I don't have anything in particular. Very soon, shortly after moving to the U.S., my dad used to have like an hour drive to work on a road that was not a highway. It was kind of one of these state roads, one lane in either direction for the most part. And a deer jumped out of the woods and hit his car from the side and spun his car around. And the deer got up and ran away. And that was one of our first, as a family, although it was only my dad who was there, run-ins with, American type animals like squirrels and deer that are more common in the northeast of the US. And I remember that just being insane. And, I don't know what size the deer must have been, but it flipped my dad's car around, spun it around, did not flip it over. and there was no opportunity to help the deer because it ran away. Although from what I understand, Lewis, sometimes they run away on adrenaline, but are actually really injured.
That's right. Yeah, there's a good chance that did some serious damage, but a lot of the time they managed to limp off the road.
Kara wrote to me. Kara said, "Hey, David, my boyfriend is constantly forgetting that he has told me stuff. And when I tell him you told me already, he gets angry. How should I deal with forgetful people? I just don't want to have to listen to the stories over and over again." I have a couple of people in my life that don't remember that they have told me the same things many, many times. And I used to always say, "Oh, you told me." And I would stop them in the middle. And that wasn't necessarily received in the best way. And I recently read a tip about this. And what you say is, rather than "yes, you told me," which kind of implies, "I don't want to hear this again from you," and annoyance with having been told, it's, "I remember you telling me that," which is communicating the same thing, that this is not the first time that you're being told this, but it has the connotation of, it was important enough when you told it to me that I remember it, right? So it's a small difference in language, I think, Lewis, and it may not resolve Kara's problem with her boyfriend, but I think that it's something to think about.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever really had to deal with this. I think in the few times I have, I probably just said, "Yeah, you told me already," and because it's not a thing that's happening frequently, I don't think they were upset with me because I don't remember them being upset with me. So I don't really have much advice in this department, but I do like that one. I remember you telling me that. It seems like a better way to put it.
One of the people I deal with this with is my girlfriend, and I've tried this. And the problem you may have, Kara, is sometimes my girlfriend will say, "Well, maybe I just want to tell you again because I like the story." And there's really nothing you can say to that, is there, Lewis?
Well, you could say, "I don't want to hear the story again. I remember it vividly."
Yeah.
And thank you for reminding me of it. But I guess if she really wants to tell you the story again, there's really nothing you can do.
No. So, Kara, if your boyfriend just hasn't forgotten that he told you the stuff, but he wants to recount the story because he thinks it's some of his best material, you may just have to figure out if that's a small price to pay. Presumably other things about your boyfriend you do like.
I will say this: if he starts going with the story and it's one you've heard before, you don't have to listen to it. If you're watching TV, you can just keep watching TV. You can keep playing your video game. You can be on your phone, and when he's done, you can everything he just said. So you can just try your best to tune it out.
Yeah. So, Kara, if you want to play video games while your boyfriend tells you the stories again, Lewis is giving you the go-ahead to do that. Send in your questions. 219-2DavidP is the voicemail. We have a fantastic bonus show for you today. An artist turns DNA from chewed gum into sculptures. In Florida, the Department of Environmental Protection can't say climate change. And I hate to break it to you, but you might be eating seafood that was fed pig feces. I'm going to a really good seafood restaurant kind of soon, and I'm very curious about this because I want to have all the data that I need in order to protect myself. All of that and more on the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.